Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
John Epperson.
Hello.
And Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. And this week, we have a special guest, and that is Jon Druse.
That's correct.
So, John,
Hello.
do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is John, and I live in Tennessee, and I've been writing Rails apps for, almost 15 years. I started before Rails 1.0 got on the ground floor, and I've been doing it ever since.
Good deal.
Hey, folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just launched my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. It's up on Amazon. We self-published it. I would love your support. If you want to go check it out, you can find it there, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. Have a good one. Max out.
We ran across your talk where you were talking about how to lose 50 million records in 5 minutes. And I'm sure some people just crashed their cars hearing that. So do you want to give us a quick rundown on what happened, and then we can talk about what you learned? And
Yeah, so my company, the company I work for, we make products for real estate agents. The main project that I work on is listing data aggregator. So, every MLS in the country basically exposes an API that we can get listings from, and all of that, it's like 200 that we sync data from, and we're pulling all of this listing data into Mongo and then into Elasticsearch, and it's this super confusing process because the data is weird. I go into all of the intricacies about that in my talk, but yeah, basically at one point we had one method of doing things, and then we decided to create a new method of doing things, but never really cleaned up all of the old method, and essentially some YAML files stuck around way longer than they should have and caused unexpected things to happen in the app. And then, months and months went by, and then we tried to upgrade Elasticsearch. And then when it came back up, it had no data in it. So that was fun. And then we just had to resort to pulling from the backups and getting those set up, and then figuring out what the actual problem was. So it was a couple days of real headaches. But yeah, it all kind of came back to these YAML files being around for our spec, making all the tests pass, which, laziness and not doing the things we should have, not cleaning up the things we should have.
Yeah, and so one question around that is, with Elasticsearch, typically from my experience in using it, its data has been populated from a persisted source, like the database. So in your case, were you just, the API calls out to the several hundred different MLS services, were you just directly storing it in Elasticsearch, so it never actually persisted into your database?
That's correct. That's exactly what we're doing, which is kind of, mistake number one is, follow the best practices of the system you're using. And Elasticsearch says, don't use Elasticsearch as your primary data source or data store. The story we were telling ourselves was, well, our situation is unique because we have, this data isn't actually ours. We're just pulling it from someone else. And the other problem is that we didn't really know where we could put all of this data because, we're getting 200 different schemas from 200 different sources. And so it's not like we can just create databases for them. It's not like we can, now eventually we have moved on to just throwing things into MongoDB. So now things go from the API to Mongo and then into Elasticsearch, but they didn't before. They would just go straight from the API through our conversion process. So like a typical ETL, right? Where it all happened in one swoop. And so now we've kind of broken it out into multiple steps, which is what we should have done in the beginning. But sometimes you don't know what you know, right?
Yeah, not only that, but now you have a reference point to where if the data seems a little bit weird, but you can now go back to see, oh, okay, so no, we got the data like this, these values. It wasn't us. We didn't do anything on our side.
Oh, totally. That's one of the biggest benefits, actually. We always knew this. There was always situations we would be in where we would need to refetch all of the data because we made a mistake in our translation layer setup. And that was always a real nightmare because we would have to pull it all from these APIs again, which are horribly slow in most cases. And so, by having things in Mongo, it allows us to sort of re-pull everything if we made a mistake. And, it's all coming from a local source. So it's way faster. So it's been a game changer for how we operate our business in this respect, at least.
To follow up on that, this is not about judgment. I'm just kind of curious how you made your architectural choice. Was Mongo something that you were using before, or was it something that you chose in order to rectify this situation? And how did you guys choose to use that versus, for example, like just using like a JSON store in Postgres or MySQL, whatever you're using? Or are you using Mongo as your primary? Go ahead.
So the app actually uses Postgres for like active record stuff, and then uses MongoDB only for these records that come from all these sources, because it's listings, which are like houses for sale, but then there's also like agent records and off like broker records. There's a bunch of different kinds of records. I never really thought that Postgres was a good fit for this kind of stuff. I don't have a great answer for you.
No, that's fine. A non-answer is an answer.
When we set out to do like the latest version of this system, we actually did try using Kafka because we were kind of looking for something that we could subscribe to basically as like a means to ingest this local copy into Elasticsearch. And I just could never, maybe the Ruby stuff was just not ready yet or not stable yet, but I just could never get the Kafka thing. It would work fine to like sync things as they came through, but trying to like start from the beginning of, whatever channel it was or whatever they call it in Kafka, I've forgotten now, but to start from the beginning and kind of replay everything that's happened forever. In Mongo, that's turned out to be super stable, which is kind of the main thing that we were trying to get out of this system. So yeah, as an added benefit for Mongo, we can sort of query whatever happens to be in there in rare cases where we need to query the raw data. And I was actually just doing that yesterday, and it turned out to be, it's kind of slow because we haven't set any indexes or anything like that, but it's not something we do regularly, but having it available is really nice.
Awesome.
And so what was your first reaction when, or I guess let's start, like, how did you discover that the records were gone? Did you get a client support call or was it a self-discovery?
Yeah. So it was, I'm working remotely and everyone's working remotely. So we're all on Slack and we were trying to upgrade Elasticsearch. And one of my employees just messaged me and said, hey, the dashboard is saying that there's only 4 million records. Like, it should say that there's 55 million records. Like, what do you think is happening? And I was like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. We'll just see what it looks like in the morning. And, get cream. And I'm sure it'll be fine in the morning. And in the morning, it wasn't any better. So then it was like panic mode. Or not panic mode, I guess. It was more just like, okay, now we have to, like, I immediately knew like refetching all of this data was not going to happen. We had to like resort to going from the backups to restoring those. And that took several hours. And then we had to actually fix the problem, because the whole problem we were trying to fix was that Elasticsearch was like getting slow. And the whole reason it was slow, and this is kind of the punchline to my talk, is like I had gone in and like deleted indices directly from Elasticsearch. And then the indices got recreated with like default settings, which is to automatically add fields to the schema whenever there's a new field. And then we had this thing that would add fields that were timestamps. And so just all day, every day, we were adding new fields by the thousands. An Elasticsearch cluster was like trying to sync everything. So it was trying to sync like megabytes of schema configuration back and forth all day. And we're like, why is it slow? But like I said, you don't know what you don't know. We didn't know what to look for. And it's hard when it's like a big system like Elasticsearch. I'm not a Java guy, and so it's not like I can just open up, my Java toolbox and get right to the problem. And so, we were kind of guessing that upgrading would help, and, then it was catastrophe.
I've kind of been in that position myself where I started looking around. I'm like, okay, I have this need, and it looks like Sunspot Solar or Elasticsearch, or it could be a different situation entirely. That's going to fit my need. It's going to solve this problem. And so I start implementing it, and then I find out that, okay, well, everything is working great, but then a few years later, something breaks down with it. I'm like, crap, I have no idea what I'm doing now. I have no idea how to fix this. I just want my application to work. Why is it not working anymore? And so I think not in your case, because you definitely are dealing with millions and millions of records. But in my situation, I was only dealing with a few thousand. So querying the database in my situation would have been a lot better solution, because not only would it be cheaper to host, but it also was going to be easier to configure the infrastructure, as well as being a lot easier to troubleshoot if something went wrong.
Yeah. There's a lot to say about keeping things small and keeping things where that you're kind of in your wheelhouse. We were out of our depth to a certain degree, and that was kind of what caused the major catastrophe. And there was, like I say in the talk, I tried to kind of make it a general path to be aware of that can lead to catastrophe. One of the main points is having worked your way into what I called a poor status quo. It's like when things are bad and everyone just sort of accepts that they are this way, or not even bad, but they're not optimal. And everyone just sort of accepts that they are this way, and that, it would be too much work to fix it, or we don't really know how, or we don't have the skills to fix it, or whatever. And so you just kind of leave it be, because there's other stuff to do. There's more important things to do. And what can happen is that all of a sudden, like you said, all of a sudden your app isn't working the way you expect it to. But, in our case, instead of the entire ecosystem being made up of things that we understood well, there were some parts of it that we sort of understood, but didn't really to the fullest potential.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting about your talk was that you kind of describe having these, I call them landmines, right? Hey, we just got this thing in our app that we don't want to touch, right? Because it's just dangerous to touch that place. And we're not going to deal with it till later, right? And you just keep them around for forever. That's just what happens for various reasons, right? One, you have higher priorities. Two, one of the things that I think we're always fighting against is this sort of idea of, hey, I don't want to be the dude that's prematurely optimizing, right? That's sort of this counter philosophy that we're also kind of trying to balance here, right? But I thought it really interesting that at the end of the day, especially at the conclusion of your talk, right, you specifically say, actually, the problem is we left these landmines in, and then we did this thing that we thought was completely unrelated, and it triggered them, right? Mm-hmm. And then everything blows up around us.
Right.
So keep going. I thought the struggle with the balance was interesting.
Yeah, I think the term landmine is really good, because there's these situations that you can end up with that are potentially catastrophic, but you don't really know where they are until it's too late, right? Every time you decide to write any code, you're making a trade-off between readability and performance and maintainability and all of these things. And, when you work on the same project year after year, you just you get into a place where you have accepted that things are the way they are. You're not worried about things anymore because nothing's blown up yet. So I'm sure it's fine. No news is good news. Yeah. So after this experience, I try to be a little bit more aware of where things could go wrong. And the first place I have grown to look for those things is, what parts of my app am I sort of uncomfortable with? because that's usually where things are hiding.
Are you finding that you're following up on these things? Have you shifted your behavior, right? Are you now spending a little bit more time trying to clean up these places?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it can be difficult to make time for stuff like this, especially when there's new things that need to be done. But I think we do. And it's not like they're everywhere, right? It's not like you need to spend 70% of your time like finding these landmines. At least they shouldn't. If they are everywhere, then you've got bigger problems. But thankfully, for the stuff that I work on, it's not like they're everywhere. It's not like there's, many parts of the application that I'm afraid of. But I think that, it is important to sort of dedicate some time to kind of fixing things and just making sure that you're happy and comfortable with, the more difficult parts of your application.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, just that metric of this is the part of the code I'm afraid to touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And working from there.
It's a feel, right? And that's the hard part, I think, about a lot of what we do is there's sort of like a gut instinct that we have to sort of trust. And that's not really measurable. And for an engineering profession, that's a really tough thing to discuss and measure. And it's hard to justify, right? You're just like, hey, I'm trying to make some time here and it's going to take away from my priorities because I have this gut feel that I need to do this thing because something doesn't feel right, right? That's hard.
One kind of measurable way that I can look for these things is there's always one method that you have that's hundreds of lines long. And if you were to need to explain to somebody how that particular thing worked, you'd have to just read it, right? There's no way to understand it completely because it's just too big. That's, it's code smells, right? That's the easiest place to look for these things. I think there's the situation in our app too. The main culprit was these timestamps as field names. It's that's a bad idea just to begin with. We should have had a better data structure for that. But that data structure was created before we even introduced Elasticsearch into the mix, right? And so it's there's all of these decisions that sort of are like bricks in a wall, right? And they just sort of one on top of the other. So it's good to do code reviews. It's good to not do things just because this is the way you've always done them. It's good to reevaluate, right? If we would have really taken a hard look at even just that data structure, it's well, okay, I know it's going to be, 7 or 8 tickets worth of work to change this, timestamp as a field name structure into something better. And it's going to, mean work for 5 different people, but this is a liability. I don't know how, I don't know when it'll rear its head, but this is a liability. So just having you're right though. I think there's a gut feel to it also that is harder to measure.
I think some of it comes with experience, and I'm just curious, for people who don't have that experience, is there a way to train your gut?
Lose 50 million records. See, this is a tutorial video.
There we go.
Podcast.
Yeah, gosh, it is difficult to kind of manufacture experience because one of the ways I can define experience is working through catastrophes. And, catastrophes come in all shapes and sizes. And you have to kind of go through those things and learn what you learn on the other side. And that's why it's good that, there's podcasts, there's conference talks, conferences you can go to, hopefully there's senior developers wherever you work and all of those things. And we should all be there should not be a stigma about talking about mistakes, because that's where, in my opinion at least, that's where a lot of the gold can come from. DHH in one of his talks talked about, one of his keynotes talked about just-in-time learning. That's typically where all my learning comes from for these catastrophes. It's oh man, there's a big problem. Then you have to figure out why and get in there. But it's It's only when it's kind of game time and you're like forced to figure out a solution as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I would also say talk to your senior developers on the project, because chances are they have really screwed up in the past, and just talk to them about it, like over lunch or something. Just have them share some of their stories, kind of like what we're doing here, to see where you can learn from them.
Okay, so devil's advocate here. What do you do if you are the senior developer?
Well, then look back at all the mistakes that you've made and try to learn from them. I know I've made a whole bunch. I was actually preparing a Rails conference talk about the mistakes I made and the damages they've done.
As a Ruby developer, you've probably used Redis for queuing and caching. But if you're like me, you've never completely understood it. You just followed the tutorial to set it up and then hoped it'd stay up. Now that I'm building my own services for other people, I realize that you and I often don't have the desire or time to run an ops or DevOps team, or do it yourself. Plus, since you're not a Redis expert, you're not exactly sure how to know what it's doing. That's why I love Redis Green. No setup. It runs on any AWS region I want, so I can run it near me. And the tooling is amazing. I have to tell you about this feature, actually. It actually maps the memory you're using and tells you where all the memory is allocated. So this makes it really easy to see what's going on in your Redis setup. It also runs on AWS, so it scales easily and can alert you when it hits certain thresholds in performance or capacity. Sorry for going all fanboy on you, but I love this tool. Here's the thing. If you don't want to do ops or are already on Heroku or something, then use Redis Green for the rest. It's simple, yet powerful. Check them out at redisgreen.net.
I definitely appreciate you telling the world about your ails, right? But to dig more in, are there any specific things that you guys did do to change this? Like, did you not do code review before and now you're like, we do code review for everything? Or did you, are there specific things that you're like, oh yeah, because of this, we sort of changed our behavior in this way? I know that you said that you're kind of trying to find some of these landmines. Are you doing a specific thing to try and find them? Like, I don't know, carving out a chunk of time, or are you just kind of being like, well, when we find it, then we, I don't know, pay more attention than we did?
It would be really good if I could tell you that we do all these things and we follow the development methodology to a T now where we didn't before. Unfortunately, no. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is still left to gut reactions. A lot of this stuff is still, it's not like we went through every single line of code with a fine-tooth comb. We have actually rebuilt this entire application since this happened. So I'd like to say that we at least, and it wasn't because of this, it was because of a lot of things. There was a lot of shortcomings that the first app had to begin with. And we sort of wanted to begin again, like with the end in mind. And like when I was a junior developer, there was one of my mentors had told me at one point, like, just write the code you wish you had and then make that work, right? And which I found to be like a killer way to approach things. But I've also scaled it up now to like, well, just imagine the app you wish you had. And by app, I mean, the app I work on is basically just a GraphQL API in front of a bunch of different things. So there is no like UI for it, which is, I guess, easier in some respects. But, it's like, what is the API I wish I could provide? Like, just start with that and then kind of work backwards. As opposed to our older system that had this problem, this catastrophe, was like, it used to be one thing, and then we like made it a new thing, and then we made these other new changes. And so there was like all this big progression that happened where we're trying to like, just throw coats of paint over the thing instead of just calling a spade and saying, here's the limitations in this thing. And if we want something fundamentally different, we'll have to write something new.
I have one more thing that I definitely wanted to get to asking you. I loved at the end of your conf talk, right? When you were doing question and answer, you brought up the idea of process theater. And I guess the thing that I liked about it, right, is it compacts, right, like this frustration that we all have of like, hey, I'm doing this process and I'm like following all the rules of the process, but I'm completely betraying the whole goal, right, that I'm trying to achieve here. You talked multiple times at the end of the talk about this idea of like, well, Agile's hard to achieve and things like this. I think it's very interesting that there's sort of like this push and pull anyway among all of us, right? Like we often are frustrated by process that we find useless, but at the same time, when there's no process, we're frustrated because there's sort of chaos. And I wondered what you had to say about it.
I think fundamentally, like I'm a lazy, procrastinating type of person. And it takes a lot of work for me to like sit down and be productive. So for me, I'm always like craving more process because there's nothing that feels better than like a bunch of tickets kind of teed up and you can just go over and knock them out of the park because all of the research was done, all of the designs were done, all of this, the story was written as well as it could be. And the opposite of that is you have, 58 tickets assigned to you and you're not really sure about the priority of them. You're not really sure about what's the most important thing to do. You're kind of hunting for something that you can accomplish. I mean, I literally did this yesterday. Just sat there and like looked through, the mound of tickets that are assigned to me, looking for something that I could accomplish. And so where process theater comes in is that thing. It's like if you're doing stand-ups, but it's kind of like the same thing every day and what you say doesn't really affect other people or what they're saying, like you don't really care about. And if you're doing sprint plannings, but it's sort of like you're not really like too involved in making sure that every ticket is understood. And there's a lot of ways we can like convince ourselves that we are following a practice when we're just sort of not really doing anything. We're just sort of floating through. And I think that can contribute to, poor decision making when you're writing code too, because it's like, what am I even doing? No one even cares about this. I'm going to write this piece of code and it's like, I don't even know why I'm writing it. There's all kinds of things. I think everyone deals with that. So, I'm just another person.
All right. Well, I'm not quite sure where to go from here. Is there any other lesson or anything else you wanted to dive into with this?
I don't know. I mean, if there's any other questions you guys have for me or...
Yeah, I don't think I have anything. Dave?
No, I think it's been pretty interesting.
Yep.
Oh, I was going to say, so clearly the big takeaway that I got from all of this was if you have a big mess up, you should refactor and remake your whole app.
Yeah.
I don't think that was your point, but that's what you ended up doing. And I thought it was ironic almost.
Maybe one of the takeaways is like sometimes rewriting stuff is the answer. It's not always the answer. And I think sometimes it's like the path of least resistance almost. It's like tempting to want to rewrite the thing that is so big that you don't even know where to start fixing it. But there are some cases where your app fundamentally does not want to do a certain type of thing. And trying to make it do that thing is going to cause more problems than it solves. And will make it, all that more difficult to maintain. And so that's why, you're supposed to begin with the end in mind. And when the end is different, when the end is, if you built an app to be a blog and then it needed to be a shopping cart, it's like, yeah, sure, you could add a shopping cart to the blog, but you wouldn't like rewrite all of the blog parts of it to be a shopping cart, right? So even in the same app, you're still just writing something new. And so sometimes it makes sense to do that on the app scale also. But you should have a good reason for doing it, not just because it's easier.
Yeah, just as far as rewriting an app, I think we've all kind of been in this position before where we first reach to this app is beyond salvageable. We have to rewrite it if we want to continue supporting this product. I know I've been there in the past, and if it's an application that you've written yourself, I think the main issue with suggesting a rewrite is unless if there has been something that has changed within you, then you're just going to repeat the same mistakes. But if you're saying that you're in a completely different position in life right now, that you have learned so much where you would avoid doing X, Y, and Z this time around, then, either a refactor or a rewrite, depending on how big of a mistake it is or how big of a thing it is that you've learned from, could be warranted. But if you haven't changed, if you're just feeling bored with this app and just want to rewrite it for one reason or another without them being like really sound reasons, then you're just doomed to make the same mistakes over.
Yep. My big takeaway was never, ever, ever upgrade your infrastructure.
It's dangerous. It's a dangerous practice. Just keep everything the way it is forever.
That's right. And then you can get hacked like Equifax.
Yeah.
All right, good deal. Jon, if people want to find you on the internet somewhere, where do they go?
So I'm a bit of a hermit. I have neglected to be on any social media for the last few years for my own sanity. But I'm on GitHub, github.com/Jon Druse. And there's probably a way that if you're screaming to get at me, you can do it there. Also, the company I work for is hiring. So if you go to wrstudios.com/jobs, there is a job opening for a Rails developer. We'd love to hear from you guys there. And that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. One of my favorite communities in programming these days is the Angular community. Every time I go to an Angular conference or meet up with some of my friends who are in the Angular community, I have a great time. And a lot of them have wound up on adventures in Angular. So if you're doing front-end development, you're looking for a way to keep current on the Angular ecosystem, and you want to have a good time listening to fun people talk about great topics related to Angular, then go check out Adventures in Angular at adventuresinangular.com. All right, let's go ahead and do some picks. Dave, do you have some picks for us?
Sure. So my first pick is some organizing clips for cables. So I've recently kind of gotten on this kick of organizing my desk in my area. And one of the last steps to conquer has been organizing the cables. Or, I don't know, if you have ever had a computer, then, cable management can be a pain. So I'm tired of putting up my foot and accidentally unplugging something because my foot got caught on the cable. So I ordered this 50 pack of Amazon or these cable clips. They're sticky back and they just clip in bunch of cables together. So I'd say that's one of my top picks. And the second pick is not a power tool, but it is a hand tool. And it is a DeWalt saw. It's a bendable saw. So this thing is the blade will actually bend as you're sawing something. So if you have a piece of trim that's in a funky position, and you just can't quite reach it with a normal kind of saw, this saw will just kind of bend in place and then you're able to saw it off. So it's really cool.
Trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. So you're going to have to put up a link so I can be envious.
It's like a super cheap tool, super cheap being in comparison to power tools. It's really cheap.
Yeah. All right, Jon, the regular Jon that's on every week.
Oh, man. So I have two picks. My first pick is actually a gem that you may know about, but I just discovered. It's called Discard. So I've used other gems in the past for handling soft deletion kind of stuff. And I always complain. I even went out with a buddy a long time ago for beers. And I think that's the only thing we talked about that night because we were just so frustrated with choices around soft deletion and default scopes and things like that just always seemed to come with it. Anyway, I wasn't looking for a soft deletion gem. I just picked up a new app and I was digging through the gem file and kind of looking through stuff. And this particular gem does everything that I want in a soft deletion gem. It gives me soft deletion, and it doesn't give me all the bad stuff that I always feel like comes. It gives me some handy tools. So I just figured I would share it with everybody else who's angry about soft deletion and how things don't work the way they want to. So check out this guy, see if you like it. I feel like it's awesome. And then for my second pick, I have a Glenguan cast strength. So the theme for like the past 2 weeks has kind of been that I, for whatever reason, seem to be sort of kind of obsessed with this Aberlour, Abenade or whatever, which is kind of a cast strength idea. If you're into like rye whiskeys or whatever, that's a similar, this is a Scotch, but it has a similar flavor profile. I went to my local liquor store and a guy was recommending to me something that tasted a lot like Aberlour. And he was like, get this Glenguan cast strength. It tastes nothing like Aberlour Abenade. It is also delicious and it's awesome. And so definitely picking that. It's different. It's cast strength. It has a flavor profile, but it's a completely, like the notes are all completely different. I don't know. I enjoy it. It has a sweeter profile. So if you're into rye whiskeys, it's probably closer to a whiskey than it is to a Scotch taste to you. So that's my second pick.
Nice. Yeah, I went and looked at Dave's saw. I have one just like it, except the handle doesn't snap around like that. So that's handy. And it's a pole saw. I don't know if people are super familiar with hand tools, but a pole saw, my father-in-law called it like a Japanese something or other saw, because most saws, they cut when you push it forward. And in this case, this saw, it cuts. So the teeth on the saw are set so that it cuts when you pull it backward, and it gives you better control if you're trying to do precision cuts. And so anyway, I love me some tools.
Yep. I couldn't remember the name of it till I found the link. I just know how to use tools incorrectly and cut myself. That usually happens once or twice.
Yeah. I'm going to be cleaning up my garage this weekend. And my pick is essentially, they have these overhead ceiling storage systems that you can get for your garage. And I don't remember which ones I got. I got them off of Amazon. I think it was one of the Flex Mounts ones. So I'll put a link to something like it in the chat so you can see it, because I ordered them a long time ago and just never got around to putting them in. Yeah, we have a lot of ceiling space in the garage, because they're like 10-foot or 12-foot ceilings or something. They're high ceilings in the garage. And so we figured we could store a whole bunch of stuff up there. So anyway, I'm looking forward to putting them in. And so, yeah, the garage ceiling storage.
Till they come crashing down on your car.
my wife won't let me put it above the car. So she's worried it's going to come down too low and she won't be able to walk around the car and walk upright around the car. So, but yeah, you tie them into the joists in the ceiling. So they shouldn't come down unless you're install them wrong. So yeah. And the other thing is you can also get like hooks and stuff for them. So you can hang bikes and things like that from them. Because we have some hooks that we've, screwed into the ceiling. And the issue with those is that, I have to be the one to pull them down because my kids can't reach them. And so I'm kind of liking the idea of putting a few of these in the garage and then setting everything up that way. So I'm going to pick the overhead ceiling for your storage in your garage. John, our guest, John, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I've got two. The first one is a low-profile mechanical keyboard. I'm recently enthralled with the idea of a mechanical keyboard, but I really do like the Apple layout. And so this one is called the Keychron K1. And Keychron makes several different styles of mechanical keyboards that are all kind of designed to be Apple first. So the command, it has an actual command key that's in the right place, kind of out of the box, which is nice. And comes with several different switch options and, like I said, several different styles. So I've been using it for a couple weeks now, and I really like it. It's got LEDs and all kinds of gamer type things, but I enjoy it anyway. And then the second pick I have is, it's not necessarily a link or anything, but it's the idea of bullet journaling. So a bullet journal is kind of a methodology for how to track really kind of anything, but mainly tasks and your personal calendar. But it's all done in just like a regular notebook with a pencil. And I've always sort of been trying to figure out how to do a personal to-do list because it seems kind of redundant from like Jira or whatever you have tickets in. But I'm finding that there's a lot of stuff that I'm working on or doing for work, and especially for personal things, but for work, that really isn't captured in tickets. And it helps me, kind of what I was saying before, I'm like kind of a naturally lazy, procrastinating type person. Kind of helps me kind of get some momentum going and feel like I'm productive, and that can really help. So bullet journaling, you can just search YouTube for bullet journal. There's a million videos. So yeah, those are my picks.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for coming, Jon. This has been a fun conversation. And yeah, I always love kind of digging into, okay, what did we learn?
Thanks for having me. The RubyConf talk was a blast. And, I'm going to be submitting more talks for more stuff going forward.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for being willing to like tell people your story, right? As we were talking about at the beginning, I think more people should be willing to do that.
Well, it's what I can do. When you've made as many mistakes as I have, it's easy to talk about them, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. All right. Sounds good. Well, we'll have another Ruby Rogues next week. And in the meantime, max out.
Talk to y'all later.
Later.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.